You are listening to How to Get Over Your Ex, episode number 220, Breakups in the Patriarchy with Cara Loewentheil. Welcome to How to Get Over Your Ex, a podcast on getting over your ex without it just taking time. I'm your host, Breakup Coach Dorothy. Let's turn your pain into power and your heartbreak into happy. Hello, beautiful brave hearts. How is everyone doing? I am just super excited. Today we have Cara Loewentheil on. I have had the biggest girl crush ever on you. This is brand new information for her. She has been in the coaching realm since I started. I met her officially at, I think it might have been it wasn't at my coach certification. It was at my first mastermind.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love Cara's work. She's an amazing human being, inside and outside. So I'm just so excited to have you here. Thank you, Cara. Would you please go ahead and introduce yourself? I would love for everyone to know who you are, what you do, where you are, all the things.
I mean, listen, amazing person inside out is already like a better introduction than I've ever gotten. I don't know if I can live up to that, but I'm Cara Loewentheil. I'm the host of the Unfuck Your Brain podcast. And I am a former women's rights lawyer and academic before I became a life coach, as is the normal career path that everybody follows from the Ivy League. And I am the author of Take Back Your Brain, which is coming out in May, but is already available for pre-order, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So my work really focuses on how women are taught to think about themselves. When I came into the coaching world, as I'm sure you experienced, it was very focused on like evolutionary biology and cognitive psychology, both of which I think are very important. And then, sort of traditional talk therapy is very focused on family of origin dynamics, your childhood experiences. But from my perspective as someone who'd studied a lot of kind of feminist theory and how women are treated in society, it was sort of glaringly obvious to me that we were missing a huge realm of impact on women's brains, which is how society treats women, what messages society gives women about themselves. So that's really what my work focuses on in any area of women's lives, teaching women how to become aware of what they've learned from society about who they're supposed to be and what matters about them, and then how to change their thoughts so that they can decide for themselves.
So good. I love it. Thank you so much for your introduction. I actually really have a question, and I didn't, put this in our questions ahead of time, so I apologize. Just let me know.
I've done about 6,000 podcast interviews in my life. I'm like, I can just rock and roll. We don't need.
Let's go. Okay. So, I was really curious because I actually don't know this about you, but have you ever been through a breakup or heartbreak that was either traumatic or impactful or
every single relationship till my current engagement, essentially. No, I mean, I did the breaking up sometimes too, but yeah, I mean, dating, this is part of why I was so excited to come on the show, is that I think dating is a area in which dating and breakups, because they really go together. It's like the way we react to a breakup has to do with how we're socialized about dating and relationships. And I think it's like one of the most powerful areas for this work, because women absorb so much bananas socialization about relationships and kind of their centrality in a woman's life, romantic relationships. And dating was an area that I did a ton of work in myself. That was like one of my big areas I worked on with thought work and coaching. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I pretty much although I did some of the breaking up in the relationships I considered less significant until my current partner, I think that in all of the relationships I considered really significant, I was the person who was broken up with and was very brokenhearted about it. So yes, I have many a psychological meltdown over breakups in my past.
Heartbreak. It's so deep sometimes. Well, most of the time I would say it's deep. So, well, number one, congratulations on your engagement. I'm very excited. I saw that on Facebook. It was so fun to watch. Your ring is gorgeous. But tell me about your last breakup. What were some of the things that you felt like you struggled a lot with, and how did you apply thought work to it?
I mean, I think that on some level, what I struggled with was the same in every breakup, which was, this breakup means I'm doing this wrong. Like, as somebody who had felt like I had trouble with romantic relationships, like I wasn't I think we all have sort of like areas of our lives where we're like, this is an area that I can't get right. It's like, whether it's your career, your relationships, your exercise, your weight, whatever, it's like, we have these areas where we're like, yeah, that one's okay. And then we have these areas where we're like, I have a whole story about this area. And relationships was really one of mine. And so, my story was like, there's something wrong with me. Like, I'm not having somehow something, my relationships aren't normal, quote unquote, or like I'm not normal, or they're not like, I'm not getting a kind of like normal guy. I mean, what did this even mean? They were all perfectly normal people. It's not like they were all magicians who lived in boxcars or something. Like, there was nothing, they were totally normal. But in my mind, first of all, normal was good. I didn't know what it meant. I just knew it was good and that it wasn't somehow happening to me. And I didn't get, I mean, I'm 43. I just got engaged. I didn't actually think I was going to get married or engaged at all. So all my friends were kind of doing that along the way. And so my story was that like, there's something wrong with me in this area. It like never works out for me. I'm not the woman that men want to really be with, or there's something wrong with the men who want to be with me. So yeah, and then once I started working on, like, I think that was the original story. Once I started doing work on it with self-coaching, it still took a few years. And so then the story became like, I'm still doing this wrong. Like, I'm trying to solve this problem and I'm failing to solve it. And I can't tell what I'm doing wrong. So I'm never going to be able to fix it. So it was just sort of a continuation of the there's something wrong with me story,
Yeah.
but it had turned into that. So in my last relationship before my current partner, it was the first time really that I was with somebody that I had done a lot of work, and I think it had gotten me to the point that I could actually like attract and, more importantly, like relate to somebody who was the kind of partner I really wanted.
Yeah.
So it felt so high stakes because it was sort of like, oh, this is like everything I've always wanted. In retrospect, I see how my current partner is a much better fit for me, but that person was like all the things I thought I wanted. And so it was like particularly devastating. And it was like, oh, it was that feeling of like, you've come so close. It's like, whatever the goal was, it's like, now I was in striking distance, but I was still like, you can hear even as I'm talking about it, it was so goal oriented. It was like, it wasn't like I'm trying to experience love for this person. It was like, I'm trying to get a relationship that works, that matches the criteria, so I can finally feel like I'm okay.
Yes, so good. What do you feel like was the turning point in terms of, I feel like those are two almost separate things that I want to talk about. The first one being, where was the turning point where you stopped telling yourself, I'm doing it wrong?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like if you asked my dating coaches, they would be like, never. We had to talk about this so many times. I mean, there really was a turning point in both things. I can't remember if I talk about this in the book. I have a whole chapter in the book about sex and romantic relationships and like our socialization around it. It's a very long chapter. I don't think I tell the story, so I'll tell it here. I had just turned, was I turning 40? How old who knows how old I am now? I've like lost all track of time. I'm 42 now. I think I said I was 43 like 3 minutes ago. I'm 42. I met my current partner a month before I turned 40. And it was not supposed to be serious because he was divorced and has children. And I was going to marry somebody who, like my partner before him, was like location independent and didn't want children. So we could like live in a chateau in France or go to Argentina or whatever. Now I'm like in Brooklyn with a school schedule because that's what happened. So I had met my partner, and then, so I'd met him, but it wasn't serious yet. We've been dating for like a month. And it was my 40th birthday. And I actually had been seeing somebody else, and that person I was going to spend my birthday with, and they'd broken up with me. It was not my last very serious partner. It was like someone in between. And I, of course, like many of us, this is why people need people like you and me, was why we need coaches, is my diagnosis of what I was doing wrong was completely incorrect. So I was like, I just am not good enough at being alone, which like retrospectively, I'm like, what was I talking about? I lived alone. I love being alone. I've been single a lot. I was actually very good at being alone. But in my head, that's what I was doing wrong. So I was like, okay, like now I'm not going to get to spend my birthday with that partner. And then my current partner, who I had only recently been dating, like had his kids, and we weren't that serious. Like, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna like go upstate by myself. To like go into like to have like an isolation spiritual weekend. It was like by myself to like get even better at being alone. I was just like, I was so dumb. Not
So
dumb. I
many
just
people
was,
can resonate with that though, Cara, because it's like
I was like so confused about what
we
I needed
hear
to
it all
do.
the time that we're supposed to be okay to be alone. And
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 I
I
was, I mean, that's what, I mean, some people really do have a problem with that, but I did not. I was just completely confused. So I decided to do that. And then like kind of three things happened in a row. Like I knew my dating coaches had actually become friends of mine. They lived upstate and they were like, well, stop at our house on the way. And like, well, we made you a cake and like, come say, and then another friend of mine who was also a coach, lives upstate, was like, well, like stop by here for dinner on your way. So I like did both those things. And then my mother had actually asked people to send in one of those like tribute video things where people can, so I basically sat down and watched like 25 minutes of people telling me like why they loved me and what I had added to their life and blah, blah, blah. And I mean, it's so rare in coaching. I'm always telling my clients not to expect this, but I really did have like a light bulb bombshell moment where I was like, oh, there's so much love in my life. And I'm so fixated on this other specific kind of love that's supposed to somehow be different. And I'm actually like, I'm like not acknowledging or appreciating or letting in all this love that is in my life, like these friends who wanted me to come by on my birthday and all these people who recorded videos, everybody from like my childhood friend to like our teacher Brooke, like all these people, recorded these videos for me of how much they love me and why. And I really, it was like in that moment, it was really like, I was like, oh, it's like I have 45 varieties of apple in the house and I am just spending 90% of my energy in life fixated on trying to get the 46th apple. That like that, if I just get, it's like I have all the apples except for the lady pink. And if I just get that one, that's going to change everything. So it wasn't like there wasn't still work to do after that, but that really was the moment that I think made me more receptive to like my partner who I don't know if I'd had that, if I hadn't had that experience, I don't know if I'd be in this relationship now.
Yeah.
Because he has a lot of love to give and I was not used to receiving that much love. He's like a golden retriever. And he was in such a different package than what I had been looking for.
Yeah.
So if I had still been really fixated on like, I have to get this kind of thing to validate me, I just am not sure I would have
The
seen it.
goal-oriented dating
Yeah.
versus like accepting the love that you're receiving. I love that. That's such a beautiful like turning point.
Yeah, it was a big, yeah. And now I live in Brooklyn and I have stepchildren. So be careful what you wish for. Sometimes when it's chaos in the house, I just look at them and I'm like, I could be in Paris right now.
I love it. It's too good. So funny. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I've always wanted to ask you that question and have never been able to have the opportunity to do that. So that was really fun. Thank you for that. Okay, so I actually brought Cara on to talk about the patriarchy and heartbreak. And I'm really excited to talk about this because I've never once spoken on the podcast about this. I feel like maybe covertly I have before, but I've never directly spoken on this. And I feel like you are the expert in this. So I'm very excited to have your expertise here to talk about it. So the first thing that I want to talk about is just from the basics. Can you please help us just understand what the patriarchy is? Tell us how it shows up in our day-to-day life. Like, let's start from ground zero, please.
Yeah. So, I mean, patriarchy is like a word that people have a lot of feelings about, right? And I think, it feels a little bit like you're describing like the Freemasons or something, like it's this vast, shadowy conspiracy. That's really not what it means. The way that I think about this is, it's just historical fact that like the US, for instance, was founded by mostly straight, we don't really know, Christian white men, right? Who were building society based on the beliefs they had at the time, which included, of course, that, slavery was fine and Black people shouldn't have the vote and women shouldn't have the vote. And even white men who didn't own property weren't allowed to vote, right? So a society is constructed on the beliefs of the people who built it. That just makes sense, right? Like when you start when you have a family, you run that family based on like what the beliefs you have are about how the world works and, how people should be and how they should interact. So that's how our society has been for, outside of the US, kind of thousands of years in the West, and in the US, we're not as old as that. But especially Western society has been basically male dominated for the whole time, meaning the men had the power, the men had more legal rights, and women had less power and less legal rights. And we've made a lot of progress in terms of legal rights now, but you can think about turning society as like turning a huge like tanker ship, right? It doesn't just whirl around because like now, since 1974, women can have credit cards. That doesn't sort of like undo everything, because all of the kind of social beliefs and the institutions, everything is still sort of built in this way that happened over history. So patriarchy is really not about saying like your husband is a bad man, or like all men are bad. Like I am obviously straight. We've been talking about my fiance. Like I have male friends and brothers and a father. It's not about like men are bad. It just means that we live in a society where men have had more power. And so what that means for thought work is a couple of things. Like number one, the way that we are taught to think about ourselves involves our gender, right? So women and men are socialized, meaning they're taught kind of different things about what matters about them. And, that used to be much more explicit along gender lines. Like it used to be that people would literally say to a woman, your job in life is to obey your husband and have babies. Now, people don't say that directly anymore, but historically, it's not that far from, well, actually, I shouldn't say that. In some religious communities, people do still say that. Most of the secular US, people don't say that anymore. But our society is not that far from when that happened. And even though we don't explicitly teach that, we've all still grown up in a society that was shaped in that way, and where those kinds of beliefs still show up in other ways. So we know, it's not kind of, I don't think it's not divisive is not the right word. It's not controversial to say that like women are taught that their physical appearance is extremely important in a way that men are maybe not. Women are taught to be very fixated on their romantic relationship status in a way that maybe men are not. You don't see a ton of advice books for men called How to Get a Wife, right? Like that's not a genre of self-help for men. It's a huge genre of quote unquote self-help for women. So when I talk about the patriarchy, and I often just talk about socialization, because it's really not, we don't have to share all the same political beliefs. Like it's really just about understanding that we live in a society where women are taught that, let's put it this way. If a woman is very successful in her career, but she's not married and she doesn't have kids, a lot of people will still think like that's kind of a tragedy. Like something went wrong. There must be something wrong with her. If a man is successful in his career, not married, a kid, nobody even mentions it.
Yeah,
Or they
that's
just
so
call
true.
him like a glamorous bachelor,
Mm-hmm.
So that's all you need to know to understand that the way that we are taught certain things based on what gender we have, and that impacts how we experience things like our romantic relationships and like breakups.
That's really fascinating. As you say that, I've been watching The Golden Bachelor, and there's a woman on there
Wait,
named.
what is the Golden Bachelor?
So, have you heard of the show The Bachelor?
Yes, I've heard of the Was it
So
like older, the Bachelor, but older?
yeah, so it's
Okay.
people like women. So then the male is, I think, in his 70s, but the women are in their 60s or above,
At least they're not in like their 30s, which I feel like is what most of TV is like. It's like, here's
right?
Sean Connery, who's 75 with a 28-year-old.
Right, right. And what was fascinating is what you were talking about. So when we were sitting there watching, there was someone, I watch it with like a big group of people.
Oh.
And there was someone in this group of individuals who were like, there was this woman who's on there. She's been married and divorced like 2 or 3 times, and she just hasn't found like the person yet. And someone had mentioned, that means there must be something like that should be a red flag. There must be something wrong there. But what I found fascinating and what I was thinking about as you were chatting about that is if it was a man, would it be a red flag? Would it
Right.
mean there was something wrong? And I don't think we would come to that conclusion as quickly or even say that.
Yeah. I mean, women are really, women are just taught that the outcome of their romantic life should be one of their primary obsessions in their life, basically. Like it is a thing that is, the top one or two important things about them, or the top one or two important things to achieve. And it's thought of as an achievement. I don't think that men are not socialized. Like I've never talked to a man who's like, my goal is really to get engaged, and then I'm going to feel like, I'm not saying never, obviously. And I'm certainly not saying like my partner has a lot of anxiety around his romantic attachments. Like it's not, men are people. It's not like men don't on a personal individual level have insecurity about their dating or, anxiety about it or whatever. but their kind of social status and the way we're taught to evaluate them is not dependent on whether or not they're married.
Yeah.
Right. They are not raised. I mean, people ask, like, as you said, as I said, I guess I'm engaged. And people are like, people ask me, people assume that I have been thinking about my wedding since I was a little girl, which I just have not been and never did. And actually have a whole, like, I also am publishing a book, and I'm like, take note of the people who are like, didn't have anything to say about the book, but are like, congratulations on getting engaged. Like, yes, that's somehow more of an accomplishment that I got a man to ask me to like live with him than to write a fucking book that is like all of my intellectual labor for 2 years. But I never thought about that. And I don't think anyone has asked my husband to be like, what did he dream his wedding would be like when he was a little boy? Like, that's just not a thing that men, right? No one. So all of this just adds up. It's not about like men being bad. It's just about, and to the purpose of the show, how could we possibly understand the ways that women react to breakups without understanding all of the programming they've received about what it means to be a woman who's successful, quote unquote, in a relationship, or who's married, or who's engaged, or who has a partner, and what it means not to be. And even if you don't date men, right? I mean, you sort of not dating men, being queer, being gay, being a lesbian, being, dating non-binary, whoever you're dating, if you were socialized as a woman, right? So you were kind of either you are a cis woman or a trans woman, or you're non-binary, but people assumed you were a woman. Like, if you absorbed any of that socialization, it's impacting you no matter who you are now and no matter who you date. It may be a little less if you don't date men, but you still were raised with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that makes total sense. So let's dive into that. I want to talk more about that. So from your perspective, what really comes to mind when I ask the question, how does patriarchy influence breakups?
I mean, I think that when you tell someone that their romantic relationship status is, if not then one of the most important things about them, and that it sort of validates that they are good enough and okay, a breakup is, of course, going to be extremely anxiety producing, shame producing. Like, there's no way to sort of tell someone that their value depends on this thing and then have it not be really upsetting when it, doesn't work out. And that's, I think maybe more acute if you're broken up with, but even if you break, I mean, this also leads to women settling, right? Or staying in relationships that they don't really want to be in or aren't what they want because they're so unwilling to be single. And women will say like, oh, I just hate being single. Or they'll sort of like say, well, I don't, maybe it's not that bad. There's all of this like justification, but I think most women don't know that what they're really afraid of is the thoughts and feelings they're going to have about themselves if they are single.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I think it impacts every aspect of a breakup. I mean, one of the ways I sometimes describe the difference in how men and women are socialized is that women are socialized to believe that their worth and value are kind of like the stock market. It's like it goes up when you're young and if you're thin, but then it goes down as you age. But then it might go up if you get engaged, but then it's going to go down if you're, if you make more money than your partner, if you
Cara,
can't
that's such a good analogy. Oh my God, that's an amazing analogy. I like love that. That is exactly what it's like.
But that's what it is. So of course, when you have a breakup, your stock plummets. Like, that's how we're taught to think about it. And so it just really I mean, I almost think of it as like patriarchy in this sense, or socialization is this like distorting lens that clicks into place over whatever a woman might naturally be thinking or feeling about her relationship, about being in a relationship, about being single, about getting married, about any of these things. It's like, it's that socialization just distorts everything. It makes you be in relationships that aren't really what you want just because they look good on paper, or it seems like it's gonna, like, that person seems like a kind of high statusy person to, nobody uses these words themselves, but sort of like, well, they're like tall and a doctor and good looking. It's like it raises your social status in your own eyes, or it makes you stay in relationships that aren't working. It makes you second guess yourself all the time. Like, women feel like they need a like good enough reason to break up with someone.
Oh, that happens so
Like,
many times, Cara.
I don't feel like a man has ever said that.
Right? No.
A man wakes up and is like, well, we've been married for 30 years, but I think I'm done.
Yeah. And think about how I feel like there's so many individuals that I speak to that have done everything under the sun to try to make it work, to fight for it, to do distorting themselves into like whatever they need to be to like make it work with this one person.
Right.
And
Because that's socialization too, right? I mean, this is something I talk about a lot in the book is like women are socialized to believe that, first of all, anything that ever goes wrong is their fault.
right.
And especially in relationships, that like when you think of the, historically, it's like when you think of the stereotypes, it's like a good quote, you can't see I'm doing air quotes, like a good woman or a good wife, quote unquote, like never gives up, like tolerates anything from her husband and is always going to forgive and is going to stay together and put her own happiness under everyone else's. Like nobody fucking ever says that about a good husband.
Mm-mm.
Right? Like nobody's like, well, a good husband just forgives the wife's infidelities or doesn't care if she's not, like that's not the thing.
Yeah.
So we have this whole story, and I think I mean, and I think, what's the right way to say this? It's like even relationships that are good, it still distorts them, right? Like I have a whole podcast about the difference between like loving and being loved, that this is something I like fleshed out after I got engaged, that I was like, my partner is so like blissfully in love because he's thinking about just that he thinks I'm great. Whereas I was socialized to think a lot about whether the man is acting like sort of in a certain way that validates me. Is he kind of being romantic enough or being whatever enough to make me feel
Mm.
amazing? It's sort of like women are just really taught to see themselves as objects of
Mm-hmm.
sexual desire, of love, of whatever. We're like the passive object that is supposed to receive. And I think it screws up even our good relationships because we still think of ourselves not as like two equal people having a relationship. And I mean, I'm somebody who's done a ton of work on this, and it's still there in my brain.
Yeah.
Like thinking
Yeah.
of myself, thinking that like like what's supposed to make me happy is somebody else desiring me and loving me in a certain way.
That's so huge. That's so huge. I've been looking at desire a lot lately. So as you say that, I'm like, ooh, that makes a lot of sense because I don't know if you've ever had that strong, like, have you ever been in a situation where you're like in a relationship with someone and you just wish they would desire you more?
I mean, yes, I coach about this all the time. I talk about this in the book, How to Create Desire for Yourself, because women are socialized. There's actually a scientific name for this. It's object of desire affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
Is like women are socialized, men are socialized to be like, I desire. I am an active agent of desire, right? The penis comes up and it's like, here's where I want to go. They're like acting upon it, right? And women are
Yeah.
socialized to believe that what's arousing is to be desired.
Oh,
Like
yes.
we are the
Mm-hmm.
object of desire, and what is sexy is for someone else to desire us. And
Yes.
so women often come for coaching and like, I want my partner to desire me more. I can't, it's like women are taught that we can't do anything for ourselves. So like, we're not even allowed to feel sexy unless someone else is desiring you.
I'm excited. So you put this in the book?
Yes, this is
I
in chapter
can't
8,
wait.
is all
Yes,
about
chapter 8, everyone. We're all going to
creating
read this. It's going to
desire,
be
because
great.
creating desirability for yourself, because it's a terrible system. Like, first of all, we know other people don't create our desire, because think about a time you've been desired by someone you didn't think was desirable. You were not
Yes.
like, sexy. You're like, ew, go away. So
Yes.
other people's desire is not what makes us feel desirable, right? It's actually
Yes.
our own thoughts, but we don't know that. And we don't like, that's just another of the ways that women are socialized to see their sexuality as a million things, but not their own. It's like something that has to be protected or can be exploited or something to bargain with or something to like that they owe to someone else. I mean, there's like a ton of different messages we get about it, but none of them are like, it's just like digestion. It's just a thing your body can do that feels nice.
So good. I love it. I love it because we talk about desire a lot in terms of getting over your ex and how your thoughts create your desire for your ex. And so when you reduce desire
Mm-hmm.
for your ex, it helps you move
Yes.
on and get over them, right? But then what we're kind of talking about is almost the inverse of how do I feel desirable myself?
But also your desire for your ex, like if you're not aware of this socialization, then you're not going to be kind of looking for and seeing the thoughts
Mhm.
that you think are about desiring your ex, but actually are about desiring the feelings you had that were caused by your thoughts about being wanted or desired or chosen or successful or lovable or whatever else.
So good. Yep. Exactly. 110%. Mic drop. I'm so excited to read that chapter, Cara. It's going to be so good. Okay, so then let's move on. I also want to talk about, okay, when I Googled this topic, I was like, where are we going to even start? I want to hashtag millennial over here, right?
Uh-huh.
So I Googled this topic, and what I found really fascinating was that there were a lot of articles that stated ways the patriarchy affects men and their relationships, which was just so not what I was expecting when I
Uh-huh.
Googled it. And I just was
It's
curious.
fascinating.
I know. I'm just
What
curious.
did they say? Was it like how it makes men what?
It I actually don't remember. I feel like I did this so long ago that I don't remember,
Mhm.
but it was a common theme of like their egos were hurt. Like the biggest thing
Oh.
that I remember was that their egos were hurt, their egos were diminished. Also that the men don't want to talk about their feelings as often, so they cope with the breakup differently or the divorce differently.
Mhm.
It's damaging to their emotional psyche because they don't process it.
Mhm.
But I just found that really interesting, and I'm wondering, like, do you
I
have
mean,
any thoughts about that?
the cynical version would be like, of course, even articles about the patriarchy and its impact on breakups have to be about men. I do think the patriarchy, first of all, that is the thing I should have said when I talk about the patriarchy in general. It's bad for everybody. Men have more power and more economic and legal and social power under a patriarchy. And so that's an advantage to them. But overall, it's bad for everybody, right? Men are socialized to not have emotions, not be able to be vulnerable or sensitive, it's not good for anybody. So I'm sure that it does impact their breakup stuff badly. But I think for women, I don't know, that's interesting. I mean, I do think that, like, what's the right way to say this? And I say this as a staunch feminist myself. I think because a lot of the ways that patriarchy impacts women in relationships and women and men in let me put this. I think romantic relationships, and especially domestic and romantic relationships, like if you live together, especially if you have children, are a place that we can really see the impact of the patriarchy in negative ways, like women doing, so much more household labor than men do, even if they are, there's a study, I just wrote about this in the book, that there's basically women do more housework and childcare than men, even if they both work, even if they, even when the woman earns more than the man. The only time that men finally do more is when the man is a stay-at-home parent without a job. So
Mm,
like, so I think that possibly what's happening is that, like, for good reason, the feminist or patriarchy aware concerns around relationships have led to understanding how patriarchy is kind of creating unequal relationships and kind of, contributes to intimate partner violence and to financial control and contributes to men not kind of taking an equal share. So it's sort of focused on that. And there just hasn't been, I mean, this is part of my work in general as somebody who I've been a professional feminist my whole life. Like I was in the reproductive rights movement. I was before college, before law school, and then I was a litigator for reproductive rights, and then I was an academic, and now as a coach. Like, the feminist project has been mostly focused on political and social equality, which are important, but I think that it has kind of neglected, or just it's time for the new frontier of how it impacts the way that we think. So I think that maybe it just hasn't, like,
gotten
bubbled up
out
to the
there.
surface. Hopefully after my book, when you Google, so this will come up.
Right? Oh, I'm so excited for your book. So tell us all about your book. Tell us, you said you've been working on it for 2 years. Like, where is it at? When does it come out? What is included in it? Like, tell us all
Yes,
the
the whole
things.
thing. It's called
Mhm.
Take Back Your Brain. And it really focuses on what I call the brain gap that holds women back, which is kind of two things. It's the gap between how men and women are socialized. We've talked about a bunch of those. And then that produces this gap in women where, especially these days, we sort of have the split brain phenomenon of, like, well, I want to feel, or I know I should feel, or sometimes I feel like really empowered and I, like, say, love being single and I blah blah blah, and then the other half of the time I'm at family Thanksgiving and I feel like a loser and everybody thinks that no one loves me and I'm going to die alone, right? So we have this, like, back and forth split brain phenomenon.
Yep.
So the book really kind of explains and takes you through some of the in an accessible way, the brain science of, like, how socialization impacts your brain, and then teaches you how to change your thinking, which I'm sure your listeners are aware of, kind of the basic principles. I have my own spin on them, but they're probably familiar. And that's kind of the first half of the book. And then the second half of the book gets really specific in a couple of different chapters. There's one on body image and kind of eating and movement, all the stuff women have around their bodies. There's one on sex and relationships. There's a chapter on money. There's a chapter on kind of time. Like women have a very hard time putting themselves first in terms of how they spend their time, how they organize their time, all of that stuff. And it ends with, I think there's one other chapter I'm forgetting, but it ends with self-confidence. There's a chapter about self-confidence. And then the end, I talk about, like, for me, all of this work is, it changes our lives, but also this is how we change the world. Like, if we want a world where women aren't defined by their relationship status, we have to do that work on ourselves. I think part of the reason things haven't changed in some ways is that even people who are very actively feminist are like talking about how the world should change, and then they think that's going to change their brain eventually. But we know as coaches, it's the other way around.
Yeah.
So the end of the book is really all about, like, how do we change the world by changing the way that we think.
Yeah. I love that. It's amazing. I'm so excited to read it. I feel like after I read the part on desirability, I'm going to want you to come back on the show and we can talk
Absolutely.
about it. I feel like that would be so fun.
Anytime. I've spent so long writing it, I'm happy to talk about it for a while. A lot of coaches and like people like me don't write their own books, and now I understand why. It's like a real big project, turns out.
Yeah, tell me, that's another personal question. You don't have to
Yeah.
answer this, but I'm curious, what's your biggest kind of aha or learning moment when it comes to writing a book?
It's actually, if you really want to, if you want to write a really good book and then you want to really sell the hell out of it, like you want to get it on a bestseller, you're really going to push. That is like a full-time job. I have been doing that on top of my job for 2 years now. It's a lot.
Yeah.
I think in the future, if I was really going to do this again, I would try to get my business set up so it could run for like 6 months without me, and do a really focused sprint on like you can't get it to publication, but you could like have a 3-month sprint where you just write the whole thing, and then a 4-month sprint where you sell it 2 years later. I think that's been like that. And I think just like, this isn't really thought work related, but as an entrepreneur, and like when you own your own business, like you get to run the show and things happen really fast. And like, it is very basically, being an entrepreneur and being in a legacy publishing house are two very different experiences and environments. And so that's been like just a very different thing to like be engaging with and experiencing, and just to be interacting with a big institution that's sort of just like, this is how we do things, we have the process, blah blah blah. So that has just been kind of like, it had been a long time since I'd interacted with kind of a big institution again. That's been like kind of a new thing. But I mean, I love my team, and my editor is great, and everyone is great. Everybody's very invested in the book. It's just very like, like everything takes longer. There's more people involved.
There's more
different departments. You got to go through the whole. Yeah, it's just a very different experience.
Well, so excited. I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to share it with everyone. I know all my Bravehearts are going to love it. You guys, I cannot wait for you to read it. You're going to have to let us know what you think. Where can they find it?
Yes. So you can get the book anywhere, but if you come get the book from me, it's the same price, and you get all these amazing bonuses that we're giving away for free. It's like a win-win. So you go to takebackyourbrainbook.com. It's all one, that's the URL. And we have really amazing, like even when you just buy one copy, you get a 30-day like guided journal to help you implement what you're learning. I'm doing bonus teaching audios on anxiety and people pleasing. And then if you want to buy a couple more copies, give copies to your friends. We've got, I'm actually doing a panel with Dr. Marissa Franco, who published this bestseller called Platonic, about friendship and love, kind of friendship relationships. So we're doing a panel with people you may know, Maggie Reyes and Sade Curry, who are dating and marriage coaches. So we're going to do like a panel discussion about kind of mindset and relationships. I can't even remember. There's so much good stuff. There's like a book club in a box. There's tickets to live events. So much fun stuff. So you just go to takebackyourbrainbook.com. And as any author will tell you, pre-orders are very, very important. So if any of this has been useful and you want to buy the book, just please do it now, because that is what will help make sure the publisher prints enough books.
And how many, this is great for Christmas presents, for New Year presents, getting people started off on their their New Year goals. I feel like it'll be great.
Yes. The book comes out in May, but some of the bonuses will be available earlier. So that's really, and also you'll get when you buy it, you get the first chapter.
Perfect.
So you can
amazing. So Bravehearts, will definitely link that in the show notes for you. So it'll be there. Cara, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you would love to share with anyone listening who might be in the thick of heartbreak, who's in the thick of trying to get over their ex, who is just maybe feeling having a difficult time even during the holiday season?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like it's like I just spent so much of my life, proportionally 90% of my life so far, feeling that way. Like, you're not doing it wrong, and there's nothing wrong with you, right? And the reason that it feels so bad, this is really the part that, like, if you truly accept it, will set you free. The reason it feels so bad is not because it just has to feel that bad, or you loved them so much, or they were so great, or being in a partnership is so great. I mean, all those things are great. They may have been great, but that's not why it feels so bad. It feels so bad because you have been literally programmed since birth to think that being single is the worst thing that can happen to a woman, and that it means that you are, like, a piece of trash in society that no one has picked up. And that is not true. And when you use this work that you learn on this podcast and, to change those thoughts, that is really what's going to set you free to have an amazing relationship, or be happy on your own, because you're the longest relationship you're ever going to have.
Thank you so much, Cara. I really appreciate that. I know it's going to just settle with everyone who's listening. It's going to be so great. So thank you, thank you, thank you for all of your information and your expertise. We appreciate you so much.
Thanks for having me.
If you're loving the How to Get Over Your Ex podcast and you'd like to learn how to fast forward getting over your ex without spending months or years feeling angry, jealous, or unlovable, I would love to personally invite you to participate in our free on-demand video training, where we share 3 mind-blowing moments that will forever change your experience with your breakup or divorce. Come check it out at breakupcoachdorothy.com.